Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion app course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on imtimcorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short. Now let's work on this top section right here, all the way down through the search box. So that's this first row here, the button. Basically, make this layout a little better. So let's close this out. I am going to close it out and start it up again. We can do the hot reload to an extent, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'm going to focus in on these sections here and just try to make it look right. Because I know what the look should be, so we're just going to do that look and then I'll show you what those things changed. So let's start with our page heading. We'll grab this. We're going to create a class for this. So let's go to our site.css. The one thing I'm also going to change in here is this right here. This came with the styling. I don't like this. I'm going to comment this out. What this does is it applies as outline around selected elements, especially if they're valid. I don't want that. I don't want to have that outline there. So we're going to take it off. Okay, let's come down below all of this and we'll start our own CSS. So let's start with our class, and we're going to say inside of here, note the curly braces. They start on the same line. Technically, you can move them to the line below, but that's not the typical structure for CSS. This is one of those things that people often struggle with, is the fact that in C#, the curly braces start on the new line. We don't put them on the same line as our code. That's the general structure of how C# is laid out. In CSS, it's the opposite. We start on the same line as our declaration and then go a new line after that. So conform to the industry standards wherever possible because it makes it easier for you to blend your code. Note that up here, this is code or CSS that was written by Microsoft and it follows that same structure. If I try and force a new structure, I gotta go back through and change their structure. It's just ugly and messy, and unless you have a really good reason not to, keep with the industry standards. And just saying, well, I like all of my curly braces the same isn't good enough because they're different languages. All right, page heading here, we're gonna say text align is center. So we're gonna move that header into the center of the page. Not that hard, right? Next up is the suggestion container. This is where that button is. So let's bring this back. We're going to say dot suggestion container. And in here, we're going to say display is flex. If you're not familiar with flex, it is a really powerful, really great tool that is in modern CSS. This is not something we used to have. So having it now means that we can do really great layouts very easily, which does mean that the Bootstrap 5 layouts, while they're great and we will definitely use them, that grid isn't as crucial as it used to be. It used to be that was like the thing to have because it made the grid easy. Now with Flex, we can make a pretty easy layout, and then with grid, we can make a pretty easy grid. So it still has value, but it's not as incredibly valuable as it used to be, just like jQuery. jQuery used to have incredible value because of the fact it leveled the playing field between browsers. Now that playing field pretty much is level, so it's not as necessary. So justify content is center, and then margin bottom, we're going to put at 3 rem. So that is that container. And then inside that container, we have this suggest button. So let's grab that and bring it over here. Suggest button. And we're going to change the font here. Font family. And what we'll do is we'll change it to be the same font as up here. Right there. As our headings. So our border width is going to be 3 pixels. Our border radius is going to be 10 pixels. That border radius is going to be a pretty common sizing. 10 pixels is going to be our rounding for a lot of our borders. Padding left is 2 rem. Padding right is 2 rem. And the font weight is 900. Makes her a much heavier font. It's a super bold. So, and notice, by the way, I said 900 here. I could say bold, bolder, boldest, but the numbers make it really easy. 100 through 900, and you have to have that font installed, that number installed. Otherwise, it's going to find the closest number. So Montserrat, we have 700 and 900 installed. If I had said 100, it would use 700. That's the closest one that's installed. So just note that you have to have that font available to you, and that weight is not just some kind of magic where it figures out how to make a font a little bigger or smaller. Now let's go back over here. We also have as btn-outline-light, which if you saw, and let's just boot this up real quick. I want to illustrate this part. You also see the change we made so far. Ooh, how pretty. It's got the elements now centered. That looks nice. And we got rounded corners on our button. Cool. But notice how in the hover effect, it's black right here. Not a big fan of that. And the outline isn't quite what I'm looking for either. So we're going to address the hover effect for this button. The regular effect is just fine. So let's go back and address the hover effect. So, oops. I tried to copy it. Copy. Paste, :hover. So this is only going to apply to the hover state of our button. The color is going to be 39 BAD8. This is one of our colors. Now, this is one of those cases where I think for version 1.5 or whatever it be, not for version 1, but for later versions, I would probably work on getting Sass installed or SCSS. That's my preference here because of the fact I could just say use this color and have a variable there. And then when we build the SCSS file, it would translate it to the correct coloring, which would allow me to specify the top in a dry, don't repeat yourself kind of way. We could say, here's our colors for our whole site. And then whenever we wanted to change, let's say we have a blue color and we want to make it a few shades darker. We could change it once and it would change everywhere. Well, we can't do that right now with CSS. That's something that is only in the preprocessor style SCSS. And it's something that's really easy to do with SCSS. It's just not something that's built into the flow, the workflow of Blazor. We can definitely add it in. It's just not something that is as quick and easy to use in Visual Studio. In VS Code, I'd have it up and running in about 2 seconds, but we're not going to go through that here. I do go through it in my course because we dive really deep into CSS. But just note, we're going to use these over and over and over again. You need to make sure they're all correct. And then if you want to change it, you do a find and replace all. So not the end of the world. It's just a convenience thing to use SCSS. All right, background color. 6 Fs. And border color. 6 Fs. And again, you can use 3 Fs here because the fact they're the same letter for both of the pair. So that's 1 pair, that's 2 pair, and that's the 3rd pair. And they're the same letter, therefore we're going to use just 3 Fs instead, but I like to keep it uniform, so I put all 6 there. So that will change the hover effect for us. Next up, we have the suggestion count. So let's grab this. Suggestion count. And in here, we're going to say that just like the button, we're going to have a suggestion count also use Montserrat. The font weight, though, is going to be 700. And the font size, we're going to specify 1 rem, which should be the default, but just in case it's not, we're going to basically override it back to the default of 1 rem. Okay, so that'll apply to our number of suggestions right there. And next up, we're going to look at this btn order. So dot btn order. And for btn order, we're going to say background color is white, which is 6 Fs. And the border is going to be, for right now, we'll say 0 pixels, which actually is just 0, but 0 pixels, solid, and then we'll give it all Ds, but for right now, the border is 0. We could change that later, but right now, it's just 0. And the border radius, which I still have, is 10 pixels. So we're turning off the border for now, which means technically we could not have to put the rest of this, but we're going to leave it in place so if you ever want to turn the border back on, or if we do turn it on at a different size, we'll have the elements in place to do so. All right, next up we have, one more thing we address is the btn itself. So by default, that's taken care of by Bootstrap. We want to make a couple of quick tweaks to that. btn focus, and also, comma there, form control focus. And so this is only when you have the focus on an element. We're going to say the box shadow is none. That just turns off an outline there that we don't want to see. Okay, now we can go back and get this right here, which is going to give us the sort selected class. So let's apply that, or create that, let's say. And the sort selected class is going to have a couple of effects. So first of all, background color is going to be 6 Ds in a row. The color, which is the text color, is going to be black, so 6 zeros in a row. And the font weight is going to be 700. So this is if the button is selected saying, hey, you've been selected. You know, this is the current sorting option, either new or popular. Whichever one it is, we're going to apply these changes to it. But we're not quite done yet. We also need to have a hover effect. So sort selected hover. And we're going to set the color to be also all zeros for black. The hover otherwise would change the color of the text. So I indented this one because it's basically underneath this one. That's why I indented it. Okay, so next up we have our, let's see, search box, I believe, has a rounded control. Yep, we have rounded control here. So let's grab that. And we also have, oh, missed one, search box. So search box. And the search box, we're just going to address this, the gutter, because it gets kind of thrown off. So we're going to address that gutter and change it, shift it a little bit. Now let's go for the rounded control, grab that. And with a rounded control, we're going to say that in here, the border radius, if you can guess, 10 pixels. Okay, so that goes through all of these sections right here. So the H1, the top div for the button, and the row with our search and filter stuff. Let's run this and see how it changes the styling of this particular section. There we go. That looks nicer. Notice the suggestions, they're in white. We have the new versus popular, which if we click it, notice it changes the colors. Cool, isn't it? And the search is rounded. And it all looks kind of nice. And if we shrink this down a little bit, notice that the boxes change sizes a little bit at the different breakpoints. And then if we go too small, they stack. And we'll address this portion of it. This is right ugly right now. We'll address this portion of it once we get to the mobile formatting, where we adjust the page for mobile screens. And the reason why I'm not going to do it now is we can't have this ever-moving target of, okay, we've got it formatted, but now let's shrink the size and see how it changed that, and just it gets so confusing. So instead, what I'll do is I will build this page, and it's going to look great on a desktop/tablet. And then I'll go back through and make sure it looks great on a mobile device as well. And you may have heard the term mobile first design. And yes, you should have a design that is very, very mobile friendly as a first class citizen, as it should be primarily workable on mobile, because that's where all the search traffic, that's where all the browsing is done anymore, is on a mobile device rather than a desktop. A desktop is way down the list for where we get our web traffic from for most sites. But that doesn't mean we have to develop in a way that we make it look great on mobile and then come back to figure out our desktop. I find it easier to figure out the desktop, figure out the layout, and then figure out what makes sense for mobile that gives you the same exact experience, just in a different format. So that's what we're going to do things. So we'll keep working on the desktop version. We're not going to worry too much about the mobile version. We'll come to that once we've got everything laid out for the design for desktop. Now let's work on the categories and statuses section over here, because we're going to avoid this main part until last, just because the fact that it's the most involved. And I want to get the rest of the page kind of looking nice before we get to that section. Have to spend a little bit more time focusing on all the different permutations and options and all the rest. So category and status, let's focus there in our styling. So we can come down here. We can actually minimize this section, the call 8 section, and that will give us then just these things to look at. So if we have categories right here, So we'll start with the categories class, since that's the first thing, and then we'll focus down on the statuses after we get done categories. So let's come to the end here, and we'll say categories. And in here, we want to have a margin all around of 1 rem. And then we want to have a background color of white and a border radius of 10 pixels. We also want a padding internally of 1 rem. If you're not familiar, the margin is outside the border and padding is inside the border. So if you have a border that has a radius on it, like we do, the padding outside of that for margin, the space outside of that because of margin, there'll be space inside of it because of padding. So that gives us room to breathe. Now, inside of categories, notice we have the categories class. There are divs. So what I want to do is I am going to actually style the div itself instead of giving a separate class name. So categories space div. And we're going to say the margin top is 1 rem. And then if you hover over it, so categories div hover, then we're going to say that the cursor is a pointer. That makes it more in line with what you normally see from a button. And we're going to do a similar kind of thing. So that will be the same thing down here with statuses, but we'll get there. Before we go, though, we have the get selected category, which gives us the selected category class. So the selected category, we're going to say the font weight is going to be 700. So when you select a category, we're going to change the font weight to indicate this is the one that is currently selected. Now, let's do the exact same thing with statuses. In fact, let's just copy and paste because it really is the same stuff. I thought about just combining these two, but I decided not to because the fact that if I do, then I don't have some specific things I can do that might be different for one versus the other. Statuses and statuses and statuses and selected status. Oops. But otherwise, it's the same stuff. Now, I could also put commas after each of these, but I'm just going to have separate broken out areas for it. It's up to you how you want to do it. I would recommend that when you take this to production, that you use a minifier on it to shrink it down anyway. But either way, it's not the end of the world to have it in separate classes as opposed to just commas and using the same classes. So looks like I didn't get that right. Statuses and statuses hover. There we go. So with that, we should again test this to make sure that we've got a nice looking category and status section. And look at that. That looks a lot better than what we had before. Now, if we select courses, notice it's bold. In-depth tutorial is bold. Watching is bold. If we say all, that's still bold. So we can have these different selections and know which one is selected based upon that bold versus not bold option. So that's the category and status. They're in nice boxes with rounded borders. We've got some nice spacing inside and out. If we shrink this down, notice that the boxes shrunk down a little bit as far as their width, and they match the search box. And if we expand, the search box got smaller and the categories got smaller again as we got as the page size changed. So this allows these to properly mirror the search box and make it look intentional, like it's a column or something, like we designed this to make it look good. They get too small, of course, they go way down here at the bottom. That's not where they'll land eventually. We're going to actually do here's a little spoiler for ahead of time, we're going to do new category and status sections for the mobile pages, because it just makes sense. But for now, for tablet and for desktop, this is going to look great. I like the floating box here. I think it looks nice. So we're going to next tackle the suggestions, which still look very, very sad. We're going to make them look great and put them underneath here and kind of match the rest of the formatting of the page. So it's starting to come together as a real page now, as opposed to just text layout on a page. But you notice how the structure stays the same, but the style can really work with our data to make it look great.